So for our next speakers actually there will be two speakers for this segment in Podfiesta. First is she is a secret weapon to most international community builders and the person behind doing private podcasts for a community. Together with her agency partner Cecilia Mojica Mercado, they created the Value Pod Podcast VA School, a free community designed to support podcast VAs, managers, podcasters, podcast producers who want to succeed in the podcasting niche. They also co founded Value Pod Productions, a full service podcast production company, helping six figure B2B entrepreneurs broadcast their authority and expertise in front of the right audience through a well crafted podcast, resulting in the relentless flow of inbound leads and more business and sales as well. Please welcome our first speaker, Eloisa Almonicido. And for and another, together with her, is a podcast launch expert helping businesses and brands effortlessly launch, distribute, and grow their podcasts, turning listeners into paying clients. She used to work for a quadruple A construction firm as a civil engineer, and after 5 years in corporate, she needed to resign, flew to Bahrain under the OFW husband's visa with a decision to be the full-time care provider of her little family with her OFW husband. Wanting another opportunity to open her way, she shifted gears from her technical job to freelancing while being at home with her 10-month-old son. Please welcome Sem Mercado.
Hi,
Take the
Eka.
floor,
Thank you. Hi,
ladies.
Eka. Okay, go ahead, say. Okay, I'll just. Can you can you guys see my screen now?
Not yet.
Oops.
Oh, is that your screen, the Canva one? Yeah.
Um, it's a PDF. Oops, some tech. Oh, I think it's now showing. So hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Podfiesta attendees. It's a very hot afternoon here in the Philippines, but that won't stop us from learning podcasting together as we echo this year's Podfesta's theme this year being we are better together. So guys, if you can hear us loud and clear, can you just type in the chat yes, and can you guys type in where you are joining from so we can know, right, Eloisa?
Yes, we would want to know if what part of the world you're in right now.
Okay, I think people are typing in. So actually, I think the best way to really like sum up or wrap up today's day one session of Podfiesta is really to give or paint a picture of what really happens in the in a podcast show. So there are two roles actually. It's the podcaster and the podcasting team behind it. So if you are a podcaster that already can afford to have a team with you, we wanted to give you the actual scenario of how having a assistant can help you keep the fun in podcasting. So that's our topic for tonight for this afternoon's session. So again, we are the founders of the Value Pod Productions, podcast production business that helps podcasters build strong relationship with their audience, resulting to relentless flow of inbound leads and more business. Our services includes podcast launches, podcast management and scheduling, interview booking, and podcast education for aspiring podcast service provider. So there is two prong with our service. And under our belt, we were able to launch 50 plus podcasts from scratch. Then collectively, we had like 2 million downloads or listens with all the shows that we handle. And we were able to produce and manage over 1,500 podcast episodes collectively. Ayan. In today's session, you will learn why you need a podcast assistant to keep the fun in podcasting and how having a podcast assistant can help you win your business. And lastly, we will give you tips on how and where to get your first podcast assistant. Eloisa?
Okay, thank you so much, Seth, for that very energetic introduction. So this will be just a quick recap of, I think most of you have heard from our previous speakers earlier. I would like to recap the benefit of running a podcast for your business. So there are four benefits that we listed here. First is the authority building, because as we know, podcasts will is a platform that will showcase your authority in your specific industry. Second is free advertising, where else you can get the full control of what you are going to entertain when it comes to promotion and ads for your podcast. And the third one is the platform to build relationship. I think this is the easiest way to communicate with a person who is miles and miles away from us. I think it is very true with what Kiko mentioned earlier, that he was able to get a hold of the other people in the basketball industry.
Basketball.
And the
Yeah.
fourth would, yeah, the basketball industry. And the fourth one would be the nurturing content for your community. All these four benefits will be evident on the next presentation that we are going to present. We are going to picture and let you imagine how we were able to come up with these four benefits, and also give you the instant result of these two case study that we prepared for you. So go ahead,
Yeah, so we would like to present our first case study. This is a podcast launch client that is having a trouble in launching and maintaining his podcast. He wanted it to be autopilot because he do not want to have the stress and overwhelm managing and doing the post production work of his podcast. So I just want you guys, I just want you to meet Dave. He's my one of my long time client now. He is a real estate entrepreneur, a real estate mentor, and the host of the podcast Property Profits Real Estate Podcast. So in the real estate game, it's really building up your network. So you have a business if you grow your network, both in investors and also those people that know investors. So with Dave's like business model, he really wanted to create like a deep well of people to network with him, and he really wanted to build up those people that he knows, and knows people who are investors. So Dave wanted to launch a podcast, and this is what he told me. He said, "Hi Cecilia, I looked at everything that was involved in doing a podcast. If I have to do all this stuff myself, it's never going to happen. It's going to be a very it's going to be very sporadic." So backgrounder. So Dave was before he decided that he will do podcast. He was already doing vlog. So he was the one shooting his content and then uploading him. So this gave him the idea of the legworks or the task involved in running uh in building up a content. Vlog similar to podcast is really it involves menial, repetitive, boring tasks of post production. So because he is already aware of that, he asked for my help. And from what I get from our conversations, he has the following pain points. He wanted to do a podcast, but he do not want the overwhelm. He is aware that if he will DIY his podcast, it will never going to happen, because as a busy entrepreneur and a businessman, he do not want to waste, or he do not want to spend his time doing so much stuff other than doing his interviews or doing his content. And then lastly, his pain point is he thinks that podcasting task is really sporadic. So the goal for Dave in this case study is to really effortlessly launch the podcast show from scratch. Number two is to distribute it across podcast apps where people can consume it by demand. And lastly, use the podcast as a platform for him to interview experts or niche experts that can be his potential joint venture partners. So knowing the pain points that Dave has, I come up with this 4-step process so that we will have a systematized and seamless process in doing his podcast. Number one is recording. So with recording, Dave just have to record his content and upload it to our like Google Drive or our cloud storage, and then he needs to forget about it. And then with my help or with my support, I step in and I handle the steps 2, 3, 4. I do the production. I manage the no I do the post production works like editing, writing the show notes, creating creatives, then setting up the podcast from idea up to making it as a tangible podcast show. And then number 3 is to strategize. When the content is already like it's ready, I needed to come up with a strategy that can help promote, distribute, and market Dave's podcast. And lastly, with the launch, from having this podcast idea that I really wanted to have a podcast, but I do not want to do it myself, I was able to launch Dave's podcast on his chosen release date. And then the podcast was ready for consumption on that specific date. With that being said, with me like commanding the steps or the procedures that is needed to be done so that Dave can just keep on creating content and not bother about the post production part of the podcast. Currently, we were able to like publish 180 podcast episodes up to date. Frequency is twice a week, and then the process that Dave just have to go through is to record, upload, forget about the podcast that he did, and then repeat all the process. So if you can remember on the first like touch base that Dave and I did, he mentions that if he will do it alone, it's never gonna happen. But if you can notice that from not going to happen to a frequency of twice a week. So if this podcaster do not enjoy creating content, do you think that I can command him to do twice a week episodes if he feels that the process or the procedure is really like taxing and very draining for him? And to think that from the time that we launch, we are now on the 180th like podcast episode. So with the support that I was able to give to this client, he feels that um, and I quote from his testimonial that the podcast process is was systematized, automated for him, and he really don't have to think about it. The only job that he just needed to do is to click record, and that's the job that he just need to do every time he records a content. Don't forget to record. So and after all those the post production work is done, or the interview is done by Dave, um the episode is taken care of when he hand it to me. So imagine the time that is being freed to Dave's plate when he had or when he asked me to be his like podcast assistant. And then another this is another like cream icing on the cake. So first on the first like he just wanted a show. He just wanted to launch a show, but with the podcast help that I was able to give him, we were able to rank his podcast on the like top 200 of Apple Podcast Canada investing. So he nailed the geography that he wants to like target, Canada, because Dave is from Canada, and then investing since he was into real estate investing. So this is just an icing to all the efforts that he has done, the commitment and the clarity that he already have. So when we like achieve this one, it this added to his like social proof of and it added to his authority. Yeah. Oh, so this is the bullet of how we were able to do it. So, Dave just have to show up in his book interview and talk to his guests, then upload the files in the cloud storage and then just forget about it. Then when the episode is done, he needed to like circle back with the guest after the episode is released. So he just needed to touch base with that guest and tell the person that, hey, your interview is live. How about how about we have this conversation on how we can grow each other's businesses more, and then be potential JB partners. So what happened here is they've give first value to that guest by promoting the other person's expertise, or by highlighting him or spotlighting him to Dave's audience. And then when the time comes that he needed to like do the reciprocity, or ask him to do a conversation about growing each other's business, he already have that rapport with these partners because they already talked on his podcast show. So these are just the overview of how we were able to do it. Eliza?
Thank you, Se. So for those who are still here, I'm pretty sure that you already identify which of the four benefits of podcasting for your business is have been displayed on the case study brought in by Se. So I'm hoping that you get at least a couple of benefits there. And so now it's my turn. I would like to present to you the case study, and I would like you to meet Sam. So, Sam Laura Brown is a mindset coach and the host of the Perfectionism Project. We are able to, I think we met through the online platform Upwork, which is called Upwork. I received an invitation asking for help, specifically written out on a job posting format. So she said that I am looking for someone to help with my podcast on an ongoing basis. I require help with the tasks such as she listed out the tasks that she needed help with. She's very clear and she is very specific of what kind of tools you are going to use, and supposedly what kind of how familiar you are with this software and tools. And then next slide, Sid.
Sorry.
And so our main goal is just to take her away from the tech and post production process, because she has to focus on her main task, which is to do recording. That's her superpowers, and that's all we wanted her to do. So we created and mapped out a 3-step process to make this very, very simple. She is handling unlike with Dave, with Cecilia's case study, this is not a launch client. This is a podcast management client. So she knows how to do it herself. But the thing is, she reached the time that she really needs help. So I created and I mapped out a simple process that we can follow. So it's a 3-step process, which consists of, first, just like with Cecilia, you record and forget about it. Second is, it's going to be me. I'll produce. And the third would be the publishing or the distribution. Her main task is on step 1. And then I take over step 2 and step 3. We make it very, very simple so we can attain whatever goals that she wanted to reach for her show. And the result of this 3-step process is last April 3rd, we reached 1,195,576 downloads. And I would like to tell you that she never had even one guest on her episodes. We are now at the episode 246. I think that's the 200 episode, consisting of her just talking bi-weekly. And if you are going to go to her episode lineup, you will notice that there are a couple of few interviews there inserted, but those are interviews turned into coaching session with her paid members. So we repurpose some of her best coaching session into a podcast episode. And this is just the public publicly uh, publicly published show. So, since we already established a very strong community, we already have a big tribe that supports her. We decided that in order to supplement the membership program that she has, we must think of something that will help the community members who are paying premium monthly. So we come up with the PGSD, which is also her private podcast. Private podcast, you cannot search it anywhere. This is a private feed exclusively for the members of her paid group coaching. So because of that publicly published podcast, we were able to come up with a private podcast that will help sustain and retain her current coaching members. And there is a very small that I inserted a very small testimonial because she is so glad that i- other than producing the public podcast, we are able to come up with a private podcast exclusive for her paying members. How we did this? Oh, I sorry. So the result of the private podcast, as you could see, are raving group coaching members. So these are the people that I notice find very, very great value on the private podcast side. Other than the public podcast, which is free, the private podcast consists of very exclusive content only for the paying members. And most of them can resonate and can find great value out of the private podcast. How we do it? First is we stick to our main goal. The main goal here is to get her out of the way. After she records, stop and don't think about it. So we are able to get it done. So her main focus is to just hit record. And the second one is to be very, very intentional on how to create a content that is tailored to her ideal listeners. The public podcast targets her prospects and her future group coaching members. And the third one, the marketing that we did for her on her podcast is just all through word of mouth. Remember, we build a very strong community first before we get into a podcast. She already has a strong, loyal listeners or loyal followers, and then we come up and we build a public podcast for this strong community. And then later on, when we launch her group coaching program, we are able to provide them a supplement for the coaching service that Sam is providing, a private podcast.
Yeah. So after those case study, thank you, Eloisa. I just wanted to picture out what really happens to an episode after the clients record it, so that they will know the menial, boring task of post production. So this is what happened from the raw content. Show notes is like written. The audio is already written. From there, we can also create graphics for social media. Then we upload it to the podcast host of choice. Also, we can repurpose it to a blog post on the client's website, and then schedule email blast as a newsletter to nurture the client's list, and then schedule social media posts for marketing. So those are the post production tasks that is needed to be done for you to be able to release an episode. And Eloisa.
Okay, so how can you leverage having a podcast assistant like Cecilia and I for your business? I am speaking on to you. So I suppose you did not come up with a podcast show just to become the best podcast producer ever. So if you have little to no experience at all in handling a show or launching a show and managing a podcast, and also you wanted to make sure that you put your energy and time on working on things that you enjoy the most. We have to admit, as podcasters, we feel that the only fun part in the podcasting process is the recording, and it should stop there. You should not be thinking about the editing and mixing the audio files. And also, if you have doubts about some of your skills, I'm pretty sure some of you are not very, very well versed with graphics or with editing. Because as I mentioned earlier, your goal here is not to become the best podcast producer. And then, because it is not worthy and it would eat so much of your time, then outsourcing podcast task ensures that you are going to win in this podcasting world. Right, Sep?
Yes. How it's by the podcast assistants giving you back your time, ensure convenience on your part, and and of course we put you on control with your content and your show. Yeah. So our time is ending, Eloisa, but we prepare this FAQ so that like little tips on how you can find your first podcast assistant.
Okay, so the first one, what positions should you hire to run your show? Uh, well, it depends. Uh, do you have it depends according to your budget and the needs of your business. For example, if your budget is very limited at the moment, I would suggest to hire a podcast VA that can do everything on the podcast workflow presented by Se. Now, if you are in that middle part of having a wiggle room, a bit of a wiggle room on your budget, then I would like for you to take into consideration on getting a podcast editor, which will be the person responsible for your audio. And then the second is the show notes writer for the writing. And then the third one would be the podcast manager, who is the gatekeeper for your episode. Now, if you are in that bracket that you can afford a full team to build for your podcast, then these are the people that you should hire: podcast editor, show notes writer, podcast manager, and of course, the social media person, the one who's going to create the graphic design for you. And next is how will I find my first hire? Cecilia uh, mentioned one way on how to find your first hire. Cecilia was found by Dave through a referral. So it's through a personal network or personal connection. I shared that I was found by Sam through an online platform, which is Upwork. Those are the places that you can find and you can get your first hire. But how will you find them? Of course, with the specificity of the things that you need right now on your show. You have to audit your show. What is the most important or the most taxing task that you wanted to eliminate on your process? So you have to make sure that you are on that mindset already. Now, how to build your podcast team? So first, you must have a system. You are not going to build a podcast team and then get them into a team that has no system. Second is, in order for you to get these A players, you have to be very, very specific with your expectation, with the deliverability that you expected from them. And also, you have to specify if they have the tools that they need for them to fulfill the task that they are going to do. That's how you, because in hiring, the most risky task in hiring is building the leadership for your team. So you have to have a system, organize everything, record, and then once you're ready, once you're done with the audit, you audited your podcast workflow process and you already identify which of these tasks is not for you, then it's time for you to hire and build your podcast team.
Yeah, so I think that's the last of our presentation, Eloisa. But I just wanted to add to about how you can build your team. One important factor also is you should find that um podcast assistant that can be your number one cheerleader in creating your podcast content, and someone who will be really concerned on your podcast um, bef- as podcast assistants, we are the number one people who acts on the accountability and the we believe in the podcaster client the most in times that he do not believe in his content. So with the experience that I had with my past clients and current clients, that is the main role I play with. That's my main role. I act as an accountability partner and a cheerleader for them. How about you, Eloisa?
Well, I think same thing because I am the devil's advocate that I always have to remind them I am their alarm clock, that this is not an obligation for yourself, but this is an obligation that you have to fulfill to these listeners who are looking for help, who are looking for solutions. Because as we know, say, podcast listeners, they are very loyal. And if you kept keep them hanging, they are going to forget you and then look for another solution for their problem. So this isn't about you at all. Whenever I have to remind them over and over and over again that this is not about you, it is about that one person on the other side who is really desperate and looking for help that you, the podcaster, can only provide. So yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so for those podcaster who really wanted to level up their podcasting game, if you wanted to have we're giving away like free podcast audit if you want to level up and revamp or improve your podcast show. This is free. You can like book us a call in our Calendly link. And then if you are a aspiring podcast VA and you wanted to learn more about podcast production and the podcast production service, you can check out our Facebook group, Value Pod Podcast VA School. So thank you, Podfiesta.
Thank you, Podfiesta.